Hello everyone, it is I, the Witch of Paint, and on this lovely Sunday today, I bring you a painting of a bull and the continuation of the Cattle Raid of Cooley video I posted a while back. To recap for you guys, Queen Maeve is jealous of her husband's herd and wants to find the great dun bull of Cooley in order to make her cattle herd equal to that of her husband Ailill. This great bull belongs to the Ulstermen, and their great hero Cualnge is the only thing that's standing between Queen Maeve and her great army. So, while I am sketching out this lovely bull that I've seen, let's get you all up to speed. Last time, I believe I ended the video on the part where Cualnge killed 4 men of Queen Maeve's army as a warning. Fergus, an exiled Ulster hero, then explains who would have done this, Cualnge, to the others. And at this point, they just sit down and have a little kind of campfire vibe story time where they talk about the deeds that Cualnge has done as a child. This includes the story of where Cualnge killed the hound that I did mention in the last video, but at the time I was confused about what exactly happened because of all the names that start with C, first of all. That confused the living life out of me. Allow me to correct now what happened in that story. So, the smith, Chulainn, was throwing a feast to which Concobar, the king of the Ulstermen, was invited. Of course, I mean, he's the king. Of course he's going to be invited. Concobar goes to where the boys play and asks Cualnge if he'd like to come to the feast with him. Cualnge says, yeah, sure, but I haven't had enough play yet. I'll come along later in a bit. So then Concobar goes to the feast, but he completely forgets that Cualnge wanted to come after him later, which means that when Chulainn asks him if there's anyone coming after him, Concobar says, no, not really. So Chulainn lets his hound loose to protect the cattle while everyone else is at the feast, which then results in the hound attacking Cualnge when he comes, and Cualnge kills the hound in defense of himself, in self-defense. So in the end, it wasn't his parents mad at him, as I had thought in the last video for some reason. It was Chulainn mad at him for killing his hound, who was a very good hound and very protective. And that was the point where Cualnge said, okay, look, just raise another dog from the same litter, and while that dog is growing up, I am going to be the protector of your cattle. Which, I mean, fair enough. I mean, he did kill the dog. And that's what actually happens in the story that I've got in my book. I just wanted to correct myself on that note. I know the story a lot better now after reading it again and making a bit more sense of it. My brain was apparently a lot more willing to understand the story this time around. Anyways, back to what was happening in the present of the story. Across the journey, Cualnge continues to attack them during the night, killing hundreds and hundreds of men of the army that has joined Queen Maeve in her expedition to find this bull. And as they get closer to Cualnge threatens to kill Queen Maeve if he sees her, after which her part of the army decided to only travel with their shields above their heads in order to keep themselves, but mostly Queen Maeve, safe. I mean, why... At this point, I'm not entirely sure why Cualnge announced that he's going to Queen Maeve. I mean, pretty sure it was already obvious that he was going to try to do this, because she's in his land, trying to steal a bull from his people. Oh well. Eventually, they get to Cooley and find out that the dun bull has left for his sake and that of the herd, which obviously is just a little bit annoying to Queen Maeve, but nevertheless, they travel around the area, and Cualnge kills more of their army until Fergus, who is his friend, suggests that they try to make a deal with him. Now, I'm not entirely sure what the exact terms of the agreement was in the end, because it was worded weirdly. So, allow me to quote what Fergus said Cualnge was suggesting in the fairytale book that I am reading this from. I know it, said Fergus. I know what the man tried to suggest, and it is no advantage to you. and this is the agreement, said Fergus, that the ford on which takes place his battle and combat with one man, the cattle shall not be taken thence a day and a night, if perchance there come to him the help of the Ulstermen. What I'm getting is that they'll send a man to fight him every day, and in exchange for that, Cuchulainn doesn't kill hundreds of them at night and doesn't take their cattle or something along those lines at least. But one of the men that go to Cuchulainn, basically, is called Itacumal. I'm not sure I pronounced it right. Although from what I can understand, he volunteers to go, asks Fergus then, who is Cuchulainn's friend, to protect him. So he's asking Fergus, can you keep me safe? And Fergus is like, okay. Itacumal is quite a feisty, and if I'm allowed to say this, stupid young man. He's very arrogant. Very, very arrogant and way too sure of himself as a person. Cuchulainn wasn't even going to fight him at first. He kept saying no, but Itacumal decided to just not leave Cuchulainn alone, and even though Cuchulainn did his best to just scare Itacumal off, going, you're no match for me, you're just going to die, this is not... You're never gonna get out of this alive. But Itacumal was like, no, I want to fight you. And so Cuchulainn actually killed him. Honestly, I'm not sure where Itacumal was trying to go with this. Like, seriously, dude. Literally everyone tells you this guy is really strong, really, really scary guy. He can just kill people with his bare hands, even. But Itacumal was like, I don't believe it. And has to check himself, apparently, and now he's dead. Moving on. I don't want this to be all about the many, many men that Cuchulainn killed in battle, because there's, one, way too many of them, and I also, two, don't really want to talk about the killings all that much. So, moving on in the story. They find the bull in Cuailnge, and after Cuchulainn kills the leader of the group, Búd, oh great, now there's another killing. At least from what I can understand, the group leads the bull away, and the bull is brought to the camp, and they drive the bull along the journey and soon start to think, because Cuchulainn is still demanding men to be sent to him to be killed, and they're starting to think, okay, we are dwindling in numbers. This is not good for us. So they start to consider, maybe they should have a sword truce with Cuchulainn. Reasonable, if you ask me. So Maeve decides to send Cuchulainn a message via messenger to ask him for this truce in exchange for half the cattle in the herd. And yes, apparently they took their herd with them. It's probably to feed everyone, in case you don't find anything to hunt, maybe. I'm going to leave the story there for now. There's still way, way more for me to read through, but that will be for the next video that I do on this, whenever I get the time to read the story a bit more. And yes, perhaps I'm going to be taking this as an excuse to paint more cows, which I don't think is a bad thing, because painting cows is a lot of fun. Now, let's talk about this painting of a bull. I took the picture that I'm using as a reference by the cliffs of Moher, which does remind me that I have a bunch of new pictures from there that I want to paint, but I don't necessarily have the time to paint. Oh, the torment of having more ideas for paintings than you can physically put into practice. Anyways, we saw this bull right on our way back to the car, way after we had already left the cliffs. So this is very close to the unofficial parking lot that we tend to go to, which at this time does get a lot more full than the first time we went to the cliffs, which was still in the early months of the year. But this was a nice day, so obviously everyone was going to take this opportunity for a hike along the cliffs, which are as stunning as ever, even though I think without the fog it looks a little less mystical. But that's just my opinion. They're still awesome. So we saw this bull, which was standing near the wall, apparently keeping a lookout for the cows that were on the field across the street, and they were sort of calling towards him, and they were just communicating back and forth, just like the cows on the other side of the street would just moo towards him, and then he would moo back. for some reason. Not sure what was going on exactly, but eventually he did, moo back to them something. Now, if I had the context of this exchange, as well as the ability to understand the language of the cows, I would gladly tell you what they said, but unfortunately I don't speak cow, so it shall forever remain a mystery. For a bit, I had considered using the image of him calling out to the other cows, but I decided to use a different one instead. I mostly wanted to draw him because of how muscular he was. Gotta say, when we were walking along the street and saw this huge bull, we were quite impressed, and we were very lucky that he was in a good mood. And he was way more busy anyway, talking to the ladies on the field across the street. So, for this painting, I decided to go with an outline in ink first, before going in with my Vingo paint. At first, I did a layer of yellow ochre across the entire bowl, mostly mapping out some of the darker areas in a wet and wet layer. Now, some of these colours did mix with the colours that I had left over on the palette, so they might be a little bit more muddy than they would be if they had just taken them straight from the pan and not put them on the palette. But I don't really care about the colours mixing all that much. It just means that some of these colours I don't remember what they are exactly, because they've already been mixed on the palette. Once the first layer has sufficiently dried, I take some burnt sienna and start painting over the darker areas that were more of a reddish brown in my reference. At this point, I should perhaps mention that I did edit the picture a little bit to make the colours and shadows pop more. That is why the bull looks the way it does in the reference, which is a lot more colourful with more defined shadows and also very bright highlights. In the actual image, he was more like just beige. Anyways, after the second layer dried, I thought that the slightly more greyish spots could perhaps be achieved by layering some indigo on top of my painting. And this is the point where I start to go a little out of my usual way of doing things and take the techniques that I've learned while doing a course on portraits with watercolours, because once the layer of indigo has dried, I take carmine and put that on top, and because I am impatient, before that layer has even fully dried, I mix together indigo and carmine for a purple in order to put into the darker folds of the bull's skin, particularly around his legs and the lower part of the neck, which were both in some very dark shadows. This isn't usually how I would approach an animal portrait, because the whole technique of layering indigos and reds and stuff on the paper I usually have for human faces after I did the course, which is what I picked it up for. But this worked as well, and it looks pretty good if you ask me, so I'm okay with it. I gotta say, it was very fun to draw. And after the purple is added, and it has dried, I go over some areas with my burnt sienna again to give him the brown colour back a little bit. I gotta say, the many muscles and folds and such were so much fun to draw and paint for me. Like, this bull was just a great painting subject. His nose ring is one of the last things that I end up painting in, and I do that in a very light shade of indigo. There's not much to paint in on it anyways, and part of me kind of wishes I hadn't put it in, but it was part of the bull, so I figured, why not? But it's a bit controversial, that's all for me. For me, it's a bit of an iffy thing, because the nose is one of the most sensitive parts of a cow, and putting a nose ring on it, I mean, it's to control the bull and it is a legal requirement, but I don't necessarily like it, but that's just on me, that's just my opinion. I don't mean to offend any farmer who puts nose rings on their bull. Just, it's not something I kind of like to think about. So, moving on. As I start to finish off the bull, I start painting the flowers in different colours. Some in carmine, some in lemon yellow, some with a mix of orange that was on my palette that I am not sure what colours it is made up of, and some in lavender. The grass is done in olive green, and then I paint the sky in a mix of cerulean blue and phthalo blue with some rough brush strokes, not covering the entirety of the paper, but rather leaving white spots to appear as clouds, because the Irish sky is cloudy even in summer. We're just gonna have to deal with it. And with that, the painting is complete and I can sign it. So now we can have a nice close-up look at the final result. I do love the way that this bull painting has turned out. He looks very strong, kinda giving me some slightly sassy vibes in the drawing with how he's posing, which, fair enough, he wasn't really giving that off in the reference, but I am here for that. I hope that you have enjoyed this painting process and learning more about the Cattle Raid of Cooley with me. If you did, make sure you leave a like, and if you want to see more of my paintings, why not subscribe to the channel? Or follow me on Twitch, where I will stream every Wednesday and Friday at 3 PM Greenwich Mean Time. For the time being, I am the Witch of Paint, and I shall see you all next Sunday. Bye! Look at that! An almighty hero has made it to the end of the video. Well done to you! Allow me to give you your reward in the form of the very few outtakes that I did get out of this video. On some occasions, a man from the army may go to meet him. Actually, I just realised the story is... I just wrote it down the wrong way around, didn't I? Lovely. And way more busy talking to the ladies over on the other side of the field. Talk to the ladies on the other side of the field. He's quite the lady guy, eh? To be fair, he's quite muscular, so makes sense. Bulls, alright. Moving on.